Guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another episode of Svelto Performance. Today we're back on the GTV. We are going to be rebuilding the steering box, getting it ready to put back in the car with our electric power assist. Let's get started. All right, there is the steering box. I've got the bottom sill in. I'm just tapping it in to make sure it's fully seated. That way, hopefully we have zero leaks. So as you can see here, it's fully seated in there up against the bushing, the copper bushing that's in there. So everything looks pretty good there. So that's step one, is to get that bushing in, and then which you didn't see, but then also the bottom sill itself. So we'll hop on the next part, which is going to be inside of the box. All right, here we go. First step is just to get the bearing race clean. There's going to be two of those. So there's the other one. I'm just using a little alcohol on a rag just to clean them up. And then the worm gear that sits in the middle where the shaft goes on top of. And that one you're going to clean as well, just with the little alcohol or something. Just make sure it's clean, dust-free, lint-free, or what have you. Okay. Get the gloves on. This is going to be super, super messy, using the high temp type grease to pack the bearings and hold them in place. All right, let's pack in the grease in this worm gear. Now you notice there's a hole, and I'll show you here just in a second. As you can see, there is a little tube, and that tube will have bearings in there. So what I'm doing is I'm packing the grease inside of that tube. I'm trying to get it to go all the way to the other side and come out the other side. Once that happens, then that tube will be fully filled with grease, and then I'm going to get the remainder of that worm gear and pack all that in there. But here you just got to keep packing and packing and packing until it is fully inside that tube and coming out the other side. Oh, I forgot to mention there'll be 31 ball bearings that will go in this worm gear. That's through that little channel or that little tube at the bottom of it and all the way around it. And that's what this grease is going to be for. As you can see, I'm packing it all around now, is to hold those bearings in when you start to insert the steering shaft itself in there, so nothing falls out. So I'm going to continue to pack and get all that in there, and then we'll start putting the ball bearings in. And again, 31. Okay, so I did not lose count of the 31 ball bearings that go into this worm gear. I decided to count out 31 and put them on the towel itself. And then now we're going to start the process of packing those into that gear, and just it's going to take one at a time. It's tedious work, but just keep putting them in there. One or two may fall out. Just keep restacking them. Add a little bit more grease if you need to, and yeah, it should work. So again, just adding a little bit more grease in there. Just want to make sure things are fully saturated so that we don't have a problem. So let's get started packing the bearings. All right, just remember to count out 31 first so you don't lose count, and then you have to take everything back out and start all over. I did that the first time. I did not show that on the camera because it was embarrassing for me. So I guess I can't count taking it out of the little container. So here I'm just putting in one after the other. They're going into that little tube, and eventually they'll pop out. And then from there, you just keep stacking the remainder of them in there. I'm kind of looking around, make sure it's coming out, but just keep pushing them in. They will come out. And again, you'll know when you're done because the 31 ball bearings will be on there. And then once you're finished, just go ahead and pack it just with a little bit more grease around all of them. Again, that will keep them completely secure inside of the worm gear, and then that way you'll be able to put in the shaft and kind of rotate through them, and they'll stay in. Okay, so I'm going to finish putting these ball bearings in, and then we're going to get started on the bearing races. All right, here are the bearing races. We're going to start with the smaller one. There will be a total of 10 ball bearings that will go into that race itself. So just count out the 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then now you'll pack in, from there, you'll pack in some grease around that race, the bearing race, and then you'll just stack the ball bearings in there. And once they're in there, put a little bit more grease, stack those in there, and then just set it aside and cover it up just to keep, or try to keep dust or what have you from getting on the grease itself or in the ball bearings. So here you can see I've got the grease in. Now I'm just going to put all of the bearings in, and then that should be completed job for the smaller bearing race, and we'll start on the larger one. All right, now I'm adding grease into the larger bearing race, and I'm just going to sit that aside right now. There's 13 ball bearings. You can see I've already counted them out, but I'm not going to put the ball bearings in just yet. So I'm just going to sit them aside for just a second so that I can get a couple of things prepared, because I'm going to go ahead and start working on the shaft. Okay, so I've got the outer shaft, and then I've put the inner shaft, the steering shaft itself, in. And what I'm doing is, my hands are completely covering this. I put the larger race down, and now I am adding the ball bearings in for that. As you can see, there we go. A little bit better view. I apologize for my hands being in the way. So here we're just going to kind of put those ball bearings, 13 of them, pack them in there, pack a little bit more grease, and then go on to the next step. All right, now I'm getting some grease, and what I'm doing here is putting some grease down on the copper bushing that's in there, and then I'm going to take the other shaft. This is the one that goes straight down in the box. This is one that the wheels will get connected to, or your tie rods and all that. I'm just putting a generous amount of grease on it so that when we slide it down into the steering box, it'll slide in there easy. It'll also be able to move. Okay, so here I'm gonna put the steering shaft in. That's gonna hit the bottom of the table right now, so that's why it's sticking up so high. And now the next step is to get the the worm gear in there, and we'll just set that in there. Be very careful not to bump anything. If you bump something, the bearings may, or some of them may come out. So it's just a very difficult thing to do. You usually just have your two hands, so that makes it a very awkward. But anyway, just take your time, get it into position, and then the next step will get the steering shaft in place. All right, I've got the worm gear in. I've got the shaft sitting on top of them. Just repositioning it there just a little bit. It was a little off, but again, you're just going to have to wiggle this thing around. You've only got two hands, so it becomes difficult, and also you're worried about dropping the bearings, but we did a good job. Now here I am putting the shaft in, and then what I'm going to do here is just rotate the shaft so I can finally get it to come out the other side. And again, it's just on, our worm gear. So as you can see here, I'm just sitting there and I'm just rotating it around, and I'll have to put the shaft back on there, the outer shaft back on. We've cut the steering shaft itself for the electric power assist, so it's much smaller, and when I say much smaller, it's smaller than the tube itself, or the outside shaft that covers it. So just roll it through there a couple times, back and forth, make sure everything's going through okay. You don't see any bearings popping out, and then let's move on to the next step. All right, I got the steering box on its side. I am packing the larger bearing. That's the one where the shaft goes through it itself. I'm packing that with a little bit more grease, and then what we're going to do is carefully slide it, as you can see, carefully slide it over the shaft itself, and then we'll get it put into the steering box itself. So again, Very, very careful. You know, it's not something that if you bump it, a bearing is gonna fall off. It's not necessarily that, but just be careful that you're not being a little too rough. So there you go. That bearing is in. Now I'm sliding the outside column around the steering shaft itself. And now we'll move on to the other side. Oh, before we move on to the other side, go ahead and get the bolts in on the outside steering column itself and then tighten them down. But don't tighten them down too tight because you're still going to have to move the shaft in and out to get the other bearing in place. So put them in. I'm usually just going to, well, I usually just use the 2 on each corner just for right now. Again, I'm not putting the new gasket on there. I'm not doing any of that right now. This is just to test it, to test the load on everything, get it back in the car, and just to make sure that this shaft is long enough, everything lines up. Then another video will be welding it on and then finishing the rebuilding of the box. So now I'm going to get these 2 bolts tightened down, but not too secure, and then we'll move on to the other side. All right, got her flipped over, got the smaller bearing, it's packed in. Now we're just gonna push this bearing race inside. Now there's also a shim. I'm gonna grab that here just in a second. We are gonna use the shims on this side. There's no shims on the larger size bearing where the outer steering shaft is at. So there's the shim. So I'll have to work this in, maybe loosen up the other side a little bit, but just kind of get it put in right. And then once both of them are flush in there, then I'll add the shims, and then I'll add the cap itself, or that's what at least I'm calling it. And then we'll go on to the next phase. All right, now we're adding the shims. I've got the bearing in there properly. I've got all the shims in, as you can see. So I'm going to grab the end piece or the cap. That literally slides through a small hole in the steering shaft itself. Again, I'm just going to use 2 bolts, one on, catty corner from each other, across from each other. And that's it, just to tighten this thing down for right now. Again, I'm moving this thing in and out of the car, but you get the picture. We're just trying to hold it down so that the bearings don't fall, or the ball bearings don't fall out of the races themselves. So we'll get that connected and get it tightened, and then we'll see what else we can do before concluding the video. All right, got the 2 tightened. Now I'm going to flip back around the steering box itself. And as you can see here, the worm gear's in, everything's in, it's lined up just right. Now, again, this steering shaft is smaller than, or close to being smaller than, the column itself. So I'm going to use just some needle nose and rotate this thing around and test the load and make sure that everything is okay before putting it back in the car. All right, and there's, you can see I can turn this thing freely. Everything seems to be in there. Now, do not, once you put this back in the car, at least for the electric power steering, I'm not going to have the top on it yet, because I've got to make sure that the steering shaft and everything is aligned straight. So the wheels will get aligned straight, as well as putting the shaft onto the electric power assist column. Everything's got to be completely straight. So here I am just messing around with it a little bit more, tighten it up just a little bit more. I think I'm going to have to add some shims on the front side of this box, because I think if I tighten it too tight, I'm having some problems with the shaft binding and not really turning well. So that'll come at a later date as we get everything welded and get it back into the car. All right, for the fitment, I know I say we're not going to put the top on, but for right now we will, because I just need everything in the car to test how it loads up, turning the shaft more. So this is a top plate. We'll get the top plate on, then we'll add shims, and then we'll get the smaller plate on, and then we'll be ready to put it into the car. So I had to fiddle with this a little bit. For some reason, it just did not want to go around that arm very well for some reason, but we eventually get it in there. So let's get it in, and then let's get everything tightened down. All right, finally figured it out. Just get it tapped down. Again, just take your time doing all this. These are, this is a close tolerance for some reason on the top of the unit itself. So now I'll put the spring in the hole up top. Now this is kind of where the load from the top comes in to keep that shaft from moving up and down. Now I'm searching for some screws, shims, and all that fun stuff. So we'll have to add the shims on the top. We're adding every shim that came with the old steering box itself, and you'll notice that one sitting right in front of the new one here. But anyway, we'll get all that buttoned up and go from there. All right, guys, we have got the shaft cut enough so it goes into the steering column for the electric power assist steering column. And then we've got the box fully mounted. I'm gonna have to, since this is a CNC box, I'm gonna have to do a little bit more shimming over here. If I tighten these bolts completely down, you can't turn the wheel, it's just too tough. So we're gonna have to add some shims, and that makes sense because this is a CNC box. It's not the original box that came out of the car, so it makes sense that we were going to either have to add shims or remove shims. Fairly common, but it's, I can turn the wheel and all that, and it's turning down there. You can't really see it, but it's turning down there. So I think the box being built is pretty much done. Now, the next step we've got to do on all of this is pull all this back out. We got to take this steering shaft column or cover off, this outer cover here. That's got to come off, and then we're going to weld it on to the steering column itself. And then once that's done, we should be able to put everything back in, shim the box, power her up, and test her out. So we're getting very, very close. Today was a huge, huge win rebuilding this box. I was really hesitant on tearing it apart and then getting a new CNC box, and was really worried if I couldn't put it back together. But they're fairly simple to do. So the video, it shows what I'm doing. It's just not every step by step. There's other videos out there for that, but this is just part of the journey here of getting this Resto Mod GTV commission build put together. So there you have it. Oh, spoiler alert, there's part of the engine. We're going to do a more proper video here coming up, but you can see the cover on the motor matches or comes very close to the wheels itself. So, but there is a surprise for the airbox. I'm not going to tell you about it until it comes in. So enough of the engine. There we go. We're going to go ahead and call this a end of the video. I am worn out. It's been hot here in the garage, so you don't want to see my ugly mug closing this video out. So we're going to close this video out. But thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, ring the bell. It always helps us out, helps the algorithm out. Please subscribe. So until the next video, God bless.